Waste not, want not. This is a phrase from long before we were talking about recycling, reusing, and reducing our consumption. Yet, it's basically saying to reduce your consumption, right? And this is in a world that had nothing to do with pollution and climate change being huge issues. This is supposed to be the recipe for happiness, a self disciplined life, a life where one is not wasteful or wantful, where you feel grateful for what you have. This phrase, waste not, want not, is like 200 years old or something. It means quite simply, don't waste anything and don't want anything. I find it interesting to point out that this struggle about how much we should consume has been with us since we were human. In fact, this concept goes back at least 3,000 years to the time of the Buddha, who used to go around preaching to people that happiness is found through not wanting. And interestingly, as you try to learn to reduce your own consumption and reduce your own carbon footprint, and you come to terms with what this idea means, to waste not and want not, you'll find it does inevitably lead you down an almost spiritual path, a path of seeking wisdom and balance in a chaotic and imbalanced world. If you follow this advice to its conclusion, you will find yourself moving away from money until you don't need it at all anymore. Waste not just means use less, right? In a wasteful world where everything is made to be thrown away, we're once again looking at reducing our consumption rather than just not throwing stuff away, because it's impossible to not throw stuff away after you've bought it. Want not is directly saying to just want less. Don't want more than you have. Be grateful for what you have. Don't be greedy. Don't be envious. This is the column that advertisements are waging war on. The entire point of an ad is to make you want stuff, while you're trying to want less to be a good person, to reduce your consumption, to reduce your carbon footprint. And here you can see more of this idea of the path getting more spiritual, not being greedy or envious, being grateful. If you follow waste not to its obvious conclusion, you wouldn't buy anything with packaging if you could help it. You wouldn't buy things that have been transported long distances if you can help it. You wouldn't buy anything if you could help it, if you can just grow it in your own garden or something. If you follow want not to its obvious conclusion, you want for nothing. That means you're not asking anyone for anything. You're not even trying to get anything. You're just happy with what you have. Obviously, if you don't have any water or food, you'll die. So hunger pains will certainly drive you to get food somehow. But if you found a way to do that you find to be harmless, and you want for nothing else, then you are happy. Very similar to how the Buddha taught to be happy. The Buddha taught that attachment or expectations is the root of all suffering. So your attachment to material things will cause suffering when you lose those material things. So it's basically this idea that happiness is through having lower expectations, basically. If you want for things and then can't get them, then you feel bad that you don't have them. But if you don't want them to begin with, you don't feel bad that you don't have them. So this is sort of like a mind hack that unlocks almost limitless joy. And it just happens to coincide with all this advice of how to reduce your carbon footprint. I want to point out how advice for trying to reduce our consumption spans thousands of years. It only has to do with climate change right now because this is a pressing issue. But this has always been an issue about how are we going to logistically manage our supplies? How are we going to be happy from within? And how nowadays are we going to not destroy the planet we're living on? My British grandmother always says, waste not, want not. And she grew up in Britain in World War II. So I'm using that as one example. Britain during World War II was a very different time than modern consumer America. The entire country is low on supplies, they're at war, they need all the resources they can get going to the front, and they're on war rations. Even if you're rich, you're only allowed one stick of butter a month or something, you know. So much labor is going into the war that they don't have enough labor to produce the supplies they normally would. And a lot of the supplies are going straight to the soldiers. So I take Britain World War II to be an example of an external enemy, an external force forcing real scarcity. So the reason they need to eat less and have less and not buy as much is because there's actually not enough to go around. They're in a very extreme life or death situation. And interestingly, they're being forced to ration in a sense by an external enemy, but they're also being forced by their own country. So that's why I take this to be a good example of how the external world can force this situation. Because if everyone had found it in themselves to be able to live on very low amount of supplies without needing war rations, that would have been what the Buddha's talking about, alleviating suffering from within to have a healthy community, a healthy body. So I think of this as talking about the internal enemy. Long before consumer advertising and Instagram ads were seizing our minds, we had these issues already within us of being greedy, of being gluttonous. And it just so happens that as you alleviate yourself from those sort of behaviors, it coincides with alleviating suffering from within. So both the internal and external enemies seem to be defeated by the same thing. Now, consumer America, I think, is wrestling with both the internal and the external enemy. But the external enemy is different now because it's not real scarcity and the fear of starvation that's the external enemy. It's not the Nazi army. It's actually advertising and social media. It's AI. It's these digital machinations taking control of our own internal mechanisms. So even when we have an overabundance of food on the planet, we're getting our brains all jacked up by this AI to just keep eating too much and keep starving other people. Keep putting more oil into our cars and keep going to war for more oil. It's precisely that endless appetite that advertising causes that's causing us to lose the battle with our internal enemy, which in turn causes us to lose the battle against climate change. What does this phrase really mean in a consumer culture where we have just consumed more every year than the year before? Where our carbon footprint is just steadily going up? How can we say this phrase to each other with a serious face and believe that we're doing that in our life? Meanwhile, everything's just getting worse. The thing is, in a consumer culture, what this phrase means is it's almost taken for granted that everyone's already bought too much and eaten too much and their carbon footprint is way too big. So instead of this phrase meaning reduce your consumption to begin with, since we almost assume that's not even possible, this is what we've taken it to mean. In consumer culture, waste not, want not just becomes downsizing. We don't even really understand the concept of reducing consumption anymore. We buy like addicts, like even if we wanted to stop, we just couldn't. So now we think of the word reduce to mean downsizing. Reduce what we already have. Do I have too many pairs of shoes? Do I have too many cars? Reduce would mean you should buy only if you have to, and you should buy things of the lowest carbon footprint possible. It would mean you don't even have a car. And see, reduce would have prevented all of this. Instead of having to do spring cleaning that lasts 2 weeks or buy a storage unit, or you could just have less stuff to begin with. And this is all the result of consumer culture. The boom and bust cycle of capitalism. Times are good, times are bad. Buy low, sell high. Binge eat, crash diet. Everything's always going extremely up and down because that's the nature of the foundation of our entire society. As long as it's based on this drive to get people to consume more, to compete, to win or lose, crush the competition. It's a society of extremes. And even if you are considered a winner in this society, you're not winning because the entire planet is on the brink of destruction. And you can't even look your own children in the eye and tell them that they have a future anymore. Downsizing is just another outcropping of this diseased bipolar conditioning. We're up against so much. So many forces are at work trying to get us to consume more while we're trying to consume less. So many people just end up at some point when they're tired or they're feeling down or something, eventually that advertising finally gets through to them and then they just buy a bunch of crap. And then they just feel worse about themselves and then they have to go through the downsizing. So again, we find that this path to reduce our consumption leads us to the spiritual path. Find the middle path, the middle way. This is something the Buddha described. The idea is to not go to extremes, to find balance. The middle path could refer to a lot of things, like choosing between safety and stability or doing the right thing, keeping your family safe, or becoming a whistleblower. As humans, we're constantly put in these moral conflicts, and going too far in either direction would seem extreme, would maybe derail your life, maybe get other people hurt. So that's the concept, is that there's some middle path where you can find the best balance. But it's such a vague concept, right? And this always irked me. You'll have some corporate CEO that's a Buddhist, and they find that their middle path is dumping tons of toxic waste off the coast somewhere. And they'll justify it to themselves somehow of, how it could be even worse. So really this is their middle path, Meanwhile, you'll have someone else's middle path is like eating vegan and avoiding plastic packaging. They don't drive a car. They buy as little as possible. So it gets confusing to define for yourself what is your middle path, because that's what you're being asked to do. But part of me can't help but think that even this concept is outdated for the radical time we live in, where the actual planet could be destroyed. What is the middle path in a dying world? What is too extreme? What is not enough? There are people who just drive their car every day, take a plane whenever they want, and don't even think about their carbon footprint. Is that a middle path, or is that not doing enough? And then there are people who chain themselves to oil pipelines and try to stop the infrastructure from being built. Is that too extreme? Let me pose the question this way. If we don't do enough, whatever enough is, and then we look back and see that we've destroyed the world, then was anything too extreme? Is anything too extreme to prevent the entire ecological system from being destroyed to the point that we might not even be able to survive? Because as high tech as we are, we still greatly depend on this earth, this soil, this water, we can filter things, we can add chemicals to things, but we can't get plants and animals to grow in a natural and healthy environment and eat good food on a planet that's been destroyed. So if we lost everything, everything went wrong, the world was destroyed, and we're looking back, I can't imagine what would be too extreme to have prevented that from happening. That's my question I'm posing to you. So then what is the middle path in a dying world?